Namaskar. I'm Dr. Nalini Avinash Wagmare, working as Associate Professor at Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today's our topic is types of state and functions of state. In types of state, various different type of states existing at the time in ancient time. Ancient constitutional writers hardly discuss this problem. This is probably due to their having flourished in an age when monarchy had become the prevailing type of state. Had a book on Dandaniti been written by a citizen of an aristocratic or a republican state, we might have got some interesting discussion about the nature and types of different states like monarchy, aristocracy, and republics and their relative merits and demerits. But curiously enough, this does not seem to have happened because of less sources on it. Our writers again and again revolve around the same type of state, that is monarchy. Only a few of them passingly refer to the Sangya, that is republican state. We have shown the state was a tribal one in ancient time. Apart from the frequent reference to Vishapatis and Janapatis, the Rig Veda frequent refers to the specific tribes like the Yadus, Kurus, Anus, Durvasas, etc. Vishwamitra's prayers are said to have protected the Bharata people. In the Rajasuya sacrifice, the king is announced as the ruler of the Bharatas or the Kuru Panchalas and not as the sovereign of a particular province or kingdom. The notion of the Rashtra or the territorial state, however, was being gradually evolved in the later Vedic period. We find it clearly referred to in the Atharva Veda. The Taittiriya Samhita refers to a ritual, a partial performance of which could secure a king the overlordship over his tribe, Visha, but not over the country, Rashtra. The Brahmana literature frequently refers to the emperors as the rulers, not over all the tribes, but over the whole earth bounded the sea. It is clear that the notion of the territorial state was fully established at this time in 1000 BC. In Vedic period, from the state, monarchy was the normal form of state in the Vedic period. Raja, the king; Maharaja, a great king; Samrata, an emperor, are the different terms by which kings were designated according to their power and prestige. Some of them were called Swarajas, Bhojas. Probably they were feudatories and Jamindars. Then types of states in Vedic period. In the description of coronation, the ritual is sometimes described as securing Raja, Swarajya, Bhurajya, Vairajya, Maharaja, Samrajya to one and the same individual. Samrat. In the later Indian history, we always come across a large number of kings enjoying different degrees of autonomy and ruling as feudatories of an emperor Samrat. It is not unlikely that such feudatory existed in the Vedic period as well. They may have been known as Bhojas and Swarajas and their feudal lords as Samrats. The territorial extent of the dominion of a Samrat as compared to that of Swarat cannot be definitely determined. Most of the states in Vedic period were small. It is doubtful whether there was a state big enough to extend over a quarter of the Punjab. Samrat. The dominion of Samrat was perhaps not much bigger than that of an ordinary king. Military glory and achievements were probably more responsible for his higher title than the extent of his dominion. Rajya probably denoted a small but independent kingdom. The statement in the Atharva Brahmana that kings were common in the Madhya Desha and emperors in eastern India would support our interpretation. Vairajya denoted a republic, a state which had no king. The Arthashastra also stated that states where the principal executive authority was vested in two rulers, as in ancient Sparta, were not unknown in ancient India. Once a state exists at Patala in Sindh in Alexander days, where the sovereignty was vested in two different kings hailing from different houses. Then the kings in Vedic literature sometimes refers to kings meeting together in an assembly. We are also told that the person alone can become a king who is permitted to become one by other kings. This passage probably referred to the existence of an oligarchy where power was vested in a council of nobles, each member of which was entitled to call himself a king and had a right to elect the chief of the state, who also was called a king. We also see later how this type of state continued to exist down to 6th century in some parts of northern and eastern India. Then oligarchy state side by side with monarchical and oligarchical states, there also existed republican governments in ancient India as early as Vedic age. A passage in Aithara Brahmana stated that the people in vicinity of Himalayas like the Uttara Kurus and Uttara Madras have a Virat kingless type of the state and are therefore called Virat kingless. When it is remembered how the same passage earlier referred to the kings of the Easterners and Southerners, titled that were born by them, how it carefully stated that it is the people belong to Uttarapuras and Uttaramadras, not their kings, who were called Virat. In it becomes quite certain that these people had a non-monarchical or republican form of government. This conclusion is further strengthened when we remember how Greek authorities tell us that in the territory above referred to republican types of states were the order of the day as late as the time of Alexander the Great. Then city-state was another feature of the political life in early period. We get some account of the constitution and administration from the Greek writers. It is thus clear that Nyasa was not the capital of a kingdom, but a city-state almost centered depended upon its own resources. Then several other city-states were referred to by Greek writers. Among them were many mentioned. Seen in other places. If Mahabharata refers to powerful grammars on the bank of the Indus, it is obviously referring to the powerful city-states, some of which were written by the Greek historian. Coins issued by a number of cities like Tripuri, Madhyamika, Ujjaini, Varanasi, Kausami, etc. have come to light. It is quite probably that in some periods of their history, they were city-states rather than capital, issuing coins on their own authority. It was but natural that the city-states should have brought under their control some of the outlying villages, but the government was usually carried on by the aristocratic classes in the city itself. Then other type of state, that is confederate states. Composite and confederate states were not unknown to the ancient India. The Kuru Panchalas in the later Vedic period seem to have formed one composite state ruled by a common king. The Shutrakas and the Malavas were separate states in the days of Panini, but were very frequently mentioned together in the Mahabharata. They had formed a confederation to meet the invasion of the Alexander, and it seems to have lasted for about a century. The Lichavis, the Mala Federal Council consists of 18 members, 9 being elected by each of the confederating state. We do not, however, possess sufficient information to indicate how these composite or confederate states were functioning, what powers were retained by the federating units, and what authority was delegated to the federal center. Then, normally, however, states in ancient India were unitary in character. King was the fountain source from which the ministers and provisional governors derived their power. Village panchayats, town councils, and trade guilds also were under the general supervision and control of the central government. Then the functions of the state. Modern writers usually divide the functions of the state in two categories, constituent and ministry. Under the former class fall those functions of the state which were absolutely necessary for the orderly organization of the society, that defense against foreign aggression, protection of person and property, preservation of peace and order and adjudication, then ministrant activities of the state. Under the later class fall those activities of state which it undertakes to promote the welfare of the people, to increase their wealth by a corporate effort, and to add to their amenities of life, education, sanitation, postal services, trade regulations, roads and communication, development of mines and forests, care of poor and invalid, etc., would come under the ministrant functions of the state. The modern tendency of the state is to increase its ministrant functions. Then constitution functions. The available evidence showed that for a long time, the state in ancient India confined itself only to the constant functions. In the Vedic state protected citizens from foreign aggression. It also maintained internal order by enforcing respect for the traditional law. Like Varuna, the celestial power, uh, celestial king, the Vedic monarch was Dharmapati, the protector and enforcer of law, morality, dharma. Even the civil and criminal cases were decided by popular body sabhas. Whether they were presided over by a royal officer is not definitely known. In 4th century BC, the functions of the state, with the development of political literature from the 4th century BC, began to get greater information functions of the state. The evidence of Mahabharata and Arthashastra shows that sphere of the state activity was very extensively extended between the Vedic and the Mauryan age. We, however, are unable to trace the different stages of this development owing to lack of evidence. Then Mahabharata Arthashastra relates all aspects of human life, social, economic, and religious. The activity of state mentioned in these two texts and they related to human life, social, and economic, and religious. The state was not regarded as a necessary evil, whose curiosity activities were to be reduced to the minimum. The laissez-faire theory, which advocates that the sphere of the state activity should be reduced to the narrowest functions consistent with the preservation of law and order, was not at all popular. The activity of the state was to embrace the whole of human life, both here and hereafter. The state was to offer facilities to religious and sects to develop on their own lines and foster and inculcate piety, morality, and righteousness. Mahabharata and Arthashastra mentioned that the functions of state it was to improve the social order and encourage learning, education, and art by substituting learned academicians and extending patronage to scholars and artists. It was to establish and maintain rest houses, charity halls, hospitals, and relieve their distress due to floods, famines, pestilence, earthquakes. It was to see that the population is eventually distributed and encourage colonization of fresh lands. It was to enrich the resources of the country by developing forests, working mines, and construct dams and canals in order to make agriculture development of rain as well for as possible. It was to offer active help to trade and industry, but also to protect the population against capitalistic selfishness. If merchants, princes sought to corner the market, raise the prices. It was to regulate the vices of the community by appointing its own officers to supervise over wine booths, gambling houses, prostitutes. The well-organized government in ancient India, like those under the Mauryas and the Guptas, discharged most of the above functions. It is, however, possible that the smaller states may have confined themselves to a restricted sphere of state activities, especially in troubled times. Then, state in ancient was regarded as the center of society and the chief instrument of its welfare. Hence, it was permitted to have a wide sphere of activity. Individual liberty did not appreciably suffer in consequence, primarily because the state discharged its multifarious functions not exclusive to its own bureaucracy. The market superintendents and trade officers belong to the state bureaucracy as also the superintendents of the morality, but these work in close cooperation with trade guilds, Brahmana, Sramana assemblies, where the voices of people had the upper hand. The state and its officers only tried to harmonize the divergent interests after full consultation with guilds and local assemblies, which were more stable institutions than the state itself, and therefore enjoyed very considerable prestige and confidence. It encouraged education by liberal grants to colleges and universities, but never thought of controlling this institution by its own director of public instruction and his subordinate staff. It made liberal grants to Hindu temples and Buddhist monasteries, but never cared to dictate the dogmas or ordinances that were to be encouraged under their auspices. Then the decentralization was carried to a very great extent and extensive powers were delegated to the village panchayats, city councils, trade guilds, and the state carried on its socialistic activities. Cooperation of these popular bodies, there was hardly any encouragement to the individual liberty. Ancient Indians permitted state as a wide sphere of activity, not because they did not value individual liberty, but because they felt that the state could organize them best by reconciling conflicting interests. If its bureaucracy worked in closer cooperation with well-established popular bodies like the trade guilds and village councils. The Samiti. In modern state, the executive, legislative, and judicial powers and functions are usually distributed in different bodies. But in theory, the king in ancient India was like the president of New Indian Republic, the final source of all executive, legislative, judicial powers in his hands. In actual practice, however, the situation different from age to age. In Vedic age, it would appear that the Samiti or the parliament shared the executive powers with the king. In some cases, it could overrule him also. Then the functions of the Samiti in ancient India is the king was the supreme judicial functionary in ancient India from the post-Vedic period. But in actual practice, considerable powers were delegated to the local popular courts or panchayats. Kings and government officers usually declined to entertain a suit at first instance. The parliament or the popular assembly disappeared as an effective body in the post-Vedic period. This led to the increase in the influence and authority of king in executive and administrative matters. Legislation in the modern sense of the term was not the function of this Samiti in ancient laws, if secular, were sanctioned by the custom and if religious by the sacred text. For a very long time, the ancient Indian state used to enforce laws which were not formally approved by any limb of its body politics. The Smrtis. The scheme of taxation was also usually the one approved by the usage of the land as codified in the Smritis. The Smritis, however, permitted considerable variation in the incident of taxation. The land tax could be anything between 12 to 33%. The actual amount of the tax could thus be varied by the executive, which usually meant the king and the officers appointed by him and holding office during his pregnancy. There is sufficient evidence to show that the king soon began to claim the power to make ordinance, if not laws. Sukra expressly considered this power to the king. With the disappearance of parliament or samiti, the executive, the judicial, and the other powers tended to be concentrated in the hands of the king and the ministry nominated by him. The village councils and the town corporation, which were largely popular bodies, could successfully contest with the king to some extent in the exercise of judicial, executive, and taxation powers in the limited sphere of their jurisdiction during the Gupta and post-Gupta period. Then, vesting of the sovereignty in Indian state, it would be convenient to make a few observations about the listing of sovereignty in ancient Indian state. It has first to be noted that modern conception of sovereignty was probably not fully developed. There is no Sanskrit term exactly corresponding to it, through swamitva in the Arthashastra may be partly approaching its meaning. Sovereignty in ancient India in the Vedic period, sovereignty was probably vested jointly in the king and Samiti. In the Republican state, it was vested in central executive, which worked under the general superintendence of the Republican Parliament, where, however, only the aristocracy was usually represented. When Samitis or Parliament disappeared, the sovereignty became vested in the king alone. So Dharma was the sovereign over the sovereign. In the Republican state, the president tended to become more and more powerful. Their post often became hereditary and they began to enjoy royal titles also. Republicans, however, disappeared from India at 4th century AD, and the king's position became very strong from this time. One school held that the king was not above the law or dharma, but the later considered cases of the kingship. Dharma was the sovereign over the sovereign, and it may therefore be said that the sovereign rested in it. But though the king was below the dharma and was bound by it, though it was the law, dharma which made the king. Ancient Indian polity provided no constitutional means or checks to call the king to account if he transgressed the law. Then village councils also existed. Another school, however, pronounced the king to be done or above punishment. If he broke the law, the punishment was left to God. In extreme cases, extra constitutional remedies like the rebellion or the regicide were suggested, but they were usually impractical. Village councils or town corporations often enjoyed almost complete freedom in their local affairs. The courts, whether royal or popular, usually administrate the traditional law was embodied in the Jati Dharma, caste rules, Sreni Dharma, rules, and Janapada Dharma, local customs. So Rajatarangini give a importance about this information. Manu no doubt pronounced that a king was to pay a fine of 1,000 coins when an ordinary man had to pay that one fine only. So these are the reference books you can refer for more detail. Thank you.